Hello and welcome to Tech for Non-Techies, the only podcast that demystifies the fast-growing technology sector. I'm your host, Sophia Matveeva, Chicago-based MBA and tech entrepreneur. My aim here is to give you the skills, knowledge and confidence to find opportunities in the tech sector, whether that's through founding a company, getting a dream job, or bringing a fresh perspective to your work. In this episode, we're going to cover product management. And when I started out in my transition into tech, I didn't know what product management was, but to be fair, who comes out of the womb knowing what product management is? And it wasn't even a job when I was graduating with my undergrad degree. So, in this session, you're going to hear from Rags Vadali. Rags is a senior product manager. He now works at Facebook, he's worked at Google, and he's also worked at startups for about 8 years. And he was really helpful to me when I was building my tech company, NT. This was a masterclass taught for Tech for Non-Techie students, and you'll actually hear one of them ask a question in this show. Enjoy!
I'm a product manager. I currently work at Facebook, where where I lead a team of PMs working on building Spark, parts of Spark, which is Facebook's augmented reality platform. My background is in computer science, actually. So I have a bachelor's and master's in CS, and I was a programmer for 5 to 6 years mainly in the US. And it was then that after about 6 years that I went to Chicago Booth, got my MBA, and then transitioned over into the world of product management. And my first PM job was at Google in London, which also brought me over into Europe, and I've stayed here since. So in the last, I think now, 12, 13 odd years, I spent a couple of years at Google. And now I'm here at Facebook for the last 3 years. And in between, I spent about 8 years working in various startups across in Spain, in the Netherlands, and back in London. And that's where, I met Sophia, where like the startup that I was working in and the startup she was founding were in the same co-working space. So that's briefly about me and my background.
Awesome, thank you. So while we're all getting to know each other, I'd love for some of our attendees to tell us where you guys are. So where are you actually physically right now? And are you product managers or are you aspiring product managers? I would just love to know that. So just write your answers in the chat box. So my question to you then, Rags, is that you are a product manager with a computer science background. That might be quite scary to a few of us, because I'm assuming this is Tech for Non-Techies, so a lot of us don't know our bits from our bytes. So do product managers need to have a technical background?
No, is a simple answer.
Thank God.
So the kind of craft, if you will, or the role of a product manager has actually evolved in the past 15 to 20 odd years since it's actually been around. So when I graduated, this is 2007, at that point of time, the product management as we know today was primarily something that you found at Google, right? Where essentially they had folks called product managers who are kind of like, well, as the name suggests, they were running all aspects of actually figuring out and building a product, right? But back then, you needed to have an engineering background to be a PM at Google. I don't think that's the case anymore, but so I kind of got lucked in, right? Because I was like, hey, I did have the right background. Actually, in fact, I remember my interview loop, one of the people on my interview was an engineer. And you had to pass an engineering interview to actually get a job as a PM. We've come a long way since then, right? So when I'm hired, and I've hired a bunch of product managers across both startups and actively, one of the active interviewers also at Facebook. Now it's not so much about actually whether you're an engineer or not. The focus actually right now has shifted to, are you able to think like a product manager? Right, and the key elements of that essentially are things like, are you able to understand who you're building a product for, right? Are you able to then understand what are the key problems that these people you want to build for? What are the problems that they have? And then the last bit of it is like, and are you able to actually find the right solutions for those problems, right? As a broad definition, you can take that and apply in any industry. It could be like, you could be making shoes, for example, right? And you could be a product manager making shoes, and you really don't need to kind of like, know anything about being an engineer. But the reality is a lot of the product manager jobs, as we know, are in the tech space. And the last bit of it, which is like, how do you build the products? That's where, you work really closely with engineers and designers and researchers, right? But the role of a product manager today is not to be the engineer, right? But it is just to know how to translate what people need to be building to the right sets of people that you work with. So essentially today, you don't need to be an engineer or have a technical background to be a product manager. What you would need, though, is if you were sat in a room with engineers, that you're able to actually have a product discussion with them.
I was wondering, actually, why don't you just delve into what do product managers actually do? And start with, for people who've never heard of product management. So remember the conversations you and I had about 3 years ago, and I was completely clueless. So just go back to that.
Absolutely. So let me start from how I think about the role, or how I would actually ask people to think about the role of product manager, right? It's very easy to kind of to start thinking about, okay, what does a product manager do? And that gets into like nowadays things like, are you a product owner? Are you doing agile? Do you know X, Y, and Z? There's a level above that where you need to think about like, what is a product manager, right? And what is their role? And I think we've talked about this before. I think the best analogy I have is that a product manager, think of a product manager as a conductor of a orchestra, let's say, right? Now, the really interesting thing is you have this person who's standing with like a baton in their hand or using their hands right at the helm of and right in front of them are anywhere from 50 to a couple of hundred supremely talented musicians, right? And what they're playing is a piece of classical music that's 200 to 300, 400 years old, right? And you have a huge audience who are there to enjoy it, and you're doing this for them. The really interesting thing is that conductor is probably not as good as any of those musicians at playing any instrument. So they're not really the people who are the most capable of creating the music at using any of those instruments. And at the same time, that conductor actually has not written the piece of music that's being played. There are cases where they do, but generally you're not. So you've not come up with the music, right? But you're also not the person who's the best equipped to actually play the music. So why is a conductor so critical to that entire setting, right? It's because they are able to actually direct all of the people who are really good at what they do, right? To actually work together, to kind of like, play to the same notes, to understand, okay, this is the music, this is when the cadence goes up, this is when you need to slow. That's the job of a conductor. Think of a product manager like that, right? So you're going to typically be working on one hand with, user researchers who are actually talking to end users to understand the problem, spending a bulk of your time with engineers, designers who are actually figuring out how to build the product, working with marketers to then take the product to market, and then even in some cases, like for example in B2B and places like that, working with salespeople to actually then sell and understand people's problems and close down the loops, right? So the skill here is that you're not probably as good as any, like today, for example, I could not have, and I joke, but it's in all seriousness, I could not have gotten a job at Google as an engineer. I was never as good as any of the engineers I worked with at Google, right? But it's the art, sort of the art sometimes craft, as we've discussed also of product management. Art and science of product management is about bringing all the people together to focus on the most important problems that you as a group are going to solve, right? And then finding the most impactful solutions that you guys can then build and ship.
So as a product manager, just so I understand, if we're then thinking of the conductor of the orchestra, and by the way, I really love that analogy. Are you kind of like the boss of the product?
No.
Like the boss of the team?
No. So that's one of the very interesting aspects of how the roles are set up, right? So in every product manager role that I know, you're working with a team of people over which you have no reporting authority. So nobody ever reports into, none of the engineers, none of the designers, none of the salespeople who work, nobody ever reports into you, right? However, you are held responsible ultimately for the success or the failure of the product, right? So one of the
terrible.
it's not unlike, think of it, I think, yeah, it's like being a CEO of a product, except that you really can't tell people what to do, right? So one of the key skills we look for when I look for, and like in companies I work for, when we're hiring product managers, is the ability to actually influence others, right? Without having any positional authority. And so that influence has to come from either very strong, clear people problems that everybody around the table goes, yes, this is something we want to build for, or very clear data that indicates without a question that, yes, this is the path to take, or like, very, very clear metrics that indicate that, yes, this is succeeding or this is failing. And so, yeah, you will have to kind of lean on a variety of skills to be actually successful as a PM.
Is that the case just in Google and Facebook, or is that a general trend everywhere? Is that what every company does?
I would say so. At least from the way I sort of the PMs that I interact with, even through recruiting and the people that I know. Yeah, typically you don't have sort of you're working with cross-functional teams. I would say so. Yes.
Okay, really interesting. So we've got a question from Renu.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you both? My question is, what's the difference between a product manager and product owner? Because when I look through job adverts, they're interchangeable. So, and there's never sort of any real clarity between the two.
Good question. I find that super confusing as well. Thank you.
No, it's a great question. I don't think there's a clear answer to that because I think it depends on the situation, right? So there are product organizations where they only hire product owners, right? And there's no product manager. So in that case, you have a little bit of an overlap where you have a product owner doing what a product manager would be doing. But there is, I'll take a very classical understanding difference here. So where product owner or that term or that description has classically come from, right, is from a Scrum / Agile type of an environment. So when you think about a product owner in that sense of the word, actually the jobs or tasks that they do are quite well defined, right? So when you're working with a Scrum sort of an environment, right?
Sorry. Just because I think some people would have absolutely no idea what that is. And right. I know that, in Facebook, you're always talking about this kind of thing. So super, keep it simple for us, Rags. What's a Scrum? What's a Scrum environment?
So it's a type of product methodology of building products, right? Of how teams organize themselves. It's a named methodology, so you can go and find not just information, but people can get certified to do In that environment, there are a few roles that are defined. So you have something called a Scrum Master, and so there's a role there of a product owner, and that product owner essentially what they do is a subset of what a product manager would do, right? So where product owners, at least my understanding of it, are focused on is a lot more on the execution of a product, right? How do we build the product? So once we've actually figured out that this is the product to build, and now we're sitting around with our teams and we're going to build something for the next three to 4 months or whatever the time it is, what product owners do is actually help facilitate that process very well, right? They write requirements in the form of something called user stories without getting into the details of it, right? think of a product manager as a superset of what a product owner would do. So in addition to what, if you understand what a product owner does, product managers also are actually pushing on both sides, right? As in all the way up to kind of starting points of, okay, what should we build for whom? Like, how do we figure out that this is a problem for users? All of that work. And then at the other end, okay, we've built and shipped something. Now, how do we ascertain if it actually, do we set the right metrics to measure? Is it doing what we said it was doing? What is the next stage of this? How do we grow it, etc.?
If you want to hear the rest of this masterclass, then go to techfornontechies.co and get your membership. With your membership, you're going to get access to all of our masterclasses, which include product management, masterclass with entrepreneurs, investors, and big tech executives. And in fact, coming up, we've got a masterclass with a Harvard Business School professor teaching us about the business of AI. And that's definitely not going to be a class you will want to miss. So check us out on techfornontechies.co. If you enjoyed this episode, which I really hope you did, then please subscribe, rate, and review. It's going to be a massive help to me, but it's also going to be a help to people like you who are looking for content on the technology sector and really need to discover this podcast. Thanks for listening.